All right, let's talk about stumbling blocks since there are so many heresies being preached right now. First of all, I saw a video from our brother in Torah, David Wilbur, and I was highly disappointed with him. Number one is because he butchered Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 18 and made it say something like that God prohibits all forms of polygamy. That, let's say a Muslim, for example, were to come into the faith, then David Wilbur would say, drop your wives, leave them destitute, because that's immoral. And there were people who made plenty of comments. So I was asked by another brother, did you make a comment? I said no, because other people had already done that for me. And it's like in the Torah movement, there seems to be this attempt to explain away some verses to fit our own emotional viewpoint about sensitive issues like this. And then it gets to a point where sometimes I feel like a lot of people in the movement don't even understand the basics. So to clarify my point further about polygamy, there is no outright condemnation or prohibition of it in the Tanakh or in the Brit Hadashah. What I will tell you, though, is that God prefers monogamy. It's like just what he wants, ultimately. One man, one woman, that was his design in the garden. And he also wanted it to continue through the kings of Israel when he said that if you're going to appoint a king, you don't let them take on numerous wives because they're going to have their heart led away from Yehovah or the Lord. And that's what happened to Solomon. So basically, what we have too in Torah is this idea that if you are to take on more than one wife, then you better provide her with food, clothing, shelters implied, that's not in the verse, and her conjugal rights, her marital rights, just like the first wife. She better be loved or she can go free, and the relationship is abolished between the two of you because you're violating your ketubah, you're violating your contract, you're violating what you have agreed to effectively. Now, the reason Yeshua doesn't address the woman leaving the man with the Pharisees or the teachers of the law when they ask him about divorce is because they're coming at it from a man's standpoint. So Yeshua is telling them what they can do as men, that essentially if their wife commits adultery, then they're allowed to leave, but only if she commits adultery. Now, the thing about this polygamy stuff is that, going back to the Muslim guy that I was talking about, if he was to come to me for counsel, I would tell him not to leave his wives destitute, because that just wouldn't make any sense. Dump your wives and leave them with no way to fend for themselves. So don't provide for them anymore. And even that Muslim man would probably know in his conscience and in his heart that that would be the immoral thing to do. But what I would tell him is that because of the precedent set in Deuteronomy that Israelite kings can't have more than one wife, or shouldn't, and that elders and deacons shouldn't have more than one wife according to the Pauline epistles, which of course I think goes back to principles in Tanakh, that means, yes, he can enter covenant with Yahweh, yes, he can be a faithful attendant of the assembly, but he cannot be a part of assembly leadership. Number 2, the Day of Atonement. There are preachers and church leaders who are saying that they will not make their congregations fast for the Day of Atonement. Of course, this goes against the precedent that's set in scriptures, where the true meaning of Yom Kippur is to deprive the throat. So what that means is you're not eating food, you're not drinking water for a period of 24 hours. And I know that Yom Teruah is just around the corner, so take those 10 days to prepare for a 24-hour fast that will go from evening to evening. Also, I've read Acts chapter 27 and verse 9, which is unequivocally clear that the Jews of that day, and also the converted, Hebrews, so to speak, that came into the faith of Messiah, fasted during that time. We read about Paul sailing around the winter time, which was just post the fast. It's very explicit, and it's right there, because for me and for many other people, we can't think of other ways to deprive our bodies aside from fasting, or a way to deny ourselves, because a lot of us out here, we're foodies, and maybe you could do a digital media fast, but there's not really anything else that comes to mind as far as making sure that I am denying myself. Another thing is we have all these people teaching that the Messiah, Yeshua, is coming back on September 23rd. There's no precedent for this in the Bible, guys. There's no precedent at all for a secret rapture. Yeshua is very clear in the book of John when he prays to the Father and he says, I pray that you not take them out of the world, but that you keep them from evil. What this means is God would rather preserve us through times of trouble than remove us from the world before a time of trouble. He'd rather us endure trials and tribulations because we can't be the people that he needs us to be without them. God could give you a black belt. He could make you very rich. He could make you prosperous and well off. But what does he gain from that? And what do you gain from that? What would you gain from that? You would be like the worst black belt. You'd probably be the biggest a-hole, driving your Lamborghini, spending your money on all kinds of stupid things. And that's not what God wants. He wants us to be refined. He sits as a purifier. He sits as a purifier of silver in the fire. And so what Yehovah is doing essentially is he's putting us in the oven and he's just sitting there and he's just watching us like churn, literally. And we can't really do that. We can't really become that unless we go through the Great Tribulation. Now, the Great Tribulation is called Jacob's trouble, which makes it so that if you're grafted into the nation of Israel, which is what you are, you're an Israelite, if you choose to obey the Messiah and his commandments, that means that Jacob's trouble is designed specifically for you. It's not designed for Babylonians. It's not designed for those engaged in a false system of worship. It's also not designed for people who are not following God and who refuse continually to follow God. Because why would it be? I mean, how is God going to work with people who don't even want him? He's got to work with the people who do want him. So what that means is that God's people, according to Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through 2, have to go through a great time of trouble before being brought to life into immortal bodies at the resurrection. So in Tanakh, we read about Jacob's trouble, how awful that day will be. No other will be like it. It will be a time of trouble for Jacob, but he will be saved out of it. This means that cataclysmic events that have gone down, whether for Ephraim or for Judah, those events will not compare to what is coming. And that's why Messiah Yeshua said this. In talking about the abomination of desolation, Yeshua says, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. So he says if those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. And this is right after the abomination of desolation. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. That means that a lot of us need to be refined through persecution. A lot of us need to be prepared to be faithful even unto death. And I know this isn't a popular message whatsoever. And then we also have this other idea within the Hebrew roots movement that people are just going to disappear off into a wilderness and they're going to be led by children in this second great Exodus. And they butcher tons of verses to get to this conclusion. The funny thing about it all, though, is it contradicts again what it says in Tanakh and in the Brit about what we're all going to go through. Like, we're not special boys, okay? We don't have special privilege. None of us are greater than the apostles who were once persecuted and killed for their faith. You know, the fact that we think that we're somehow greater, and I know that this is very common in Protestant Christianity, but then it manifests itself in a different form in Hebrew roots, is just, it's basically a symptom of our pride. That's what it is. We think that we're so great that we can't possibly endure the trials and the hurdles and the things that God wants to put before us to make us the best people that we can be. So when we read that it will be a time of Jacob's trouble, yet he will be saved out of it, that's an indication that physically we'll go through the time, but spiritually we'll be saved out of it if we have a spirit of overcoming. John the Apostle writes in the book of Hitgalut, this is the Apocalypse, chapter 15 and verse 2, and I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast and over his image and over his mark and over the number of his name stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. These are the people who choose execution for their faith over denying their faith to save their lives.